Punishment. Ignis. The first day, the district leader sent us teams of youth to verify that every man had heard the orders to assemble. They boarded up the homes of the reluctant ones. They threatened them with fines. They herded them toward Kubungo and gave them big lectures. Those who tried to zigzag found themselves overtaken and set back on the right path. We went straight to the meeting place. This is how the hunt began. We adjusted to the routine. It was the same thing every day, except that later on there was no need for teams of monitors, since no one hung back anymore. Pancras. It was obligatory. A special group of hothead boys was assigned to search the houses of those who tried to hide. We feared the authorities' anger more than the blood we spilled, but deep down we had no fear of anything. I'll explain. When you receive a new order, you hesitate but you obey, or else you're taking a risk. When you have been prepared the right way by the radios and the official advice, you obey more easily, even if the order is to kill your neighbors. The mission of a good organizer is to stifle your hesitations when he gives you instructions. For example, when he shows you that the act will be total and have no grave consequences for anyone left alive, you obey more easily. You don't worry about anything. You forget your misgivings and fears of punishment. You obey freely. Alphonse. At 6 o'clock in the morning we had to get counted. Someone who had bananas to press could ask for special leave, also someone who was sick. Even later on, someone who found he had a broken animal pen could get himself a delay. But the others went. You could dawdle along the way and nap, but you had to go. You did not feel like working? You had to go. Even every day without exception, you had to join up again. There was no one on the hill who can say to God, eyes closed in prayer, that he never went hunting. For someone caught cheating, it could be serious. He had to pay a fine determined by the leader. A big fine for big trickery or repeated trickery. A cash fine, for example 2,000 Rwandan francs or even more. A fine just of drink or sheet metal, that could be negotiated. Fulgence. Everybody gathered on the field at Kibungo. The folks from Kazenze, Kibungo, Natarama, and on certain days the Interahamwe who came from Butamwa or further away. Anyone who sneaked off behind his house was denounced by a neighbor and punished with a fine, especially at the beginning when all this was new to us. Later on you set out jauntily if you took an interest in the killings. You loafed along if you cared only for the looting. If you were sick you had to explain yourself clearly. If you asked for a day to press some iragua, you had to finish your quota of cans. If you were just flagging from too much drink from the night before, you could get away with it. Everyone understood, but you couldn't do it again soon. Look out, though, if you took advantage to hang around town in broad daylight. There, in front of everyone, if you were caught, you were sent off double quick. The hunt was most demanding on days of huge operations, when we searched behind the Interahamwe and soldiers. Those fierce young fellows never let go. On those days no one slipped away because of the severe punishments. On other days were more easy-going, when it was just us hunting. Payo. We went up every day to the sports ground. Then we decided. For the farmers it was mandatory. Whoever got caught shirking was punished with a fine. Ordinarily it cost 2,000 francs, but it depended on the seriousness. If you couldn't pay, you gave a jerry can of iragua, or a piece of good quality sheet metal. Some were even fined a goat. An old man who could not work because of weariness paid nothing if he could send a son to hunt in his place. There were even healthy men who sent their wives to replace them for a day on the expeditions, but that didn't happen often because it was not legitimate. Adalbert. At the start the killings were very regulated, but later things were not so strict. Someone who felt tired or wanted to attend other things like looting, collecting sheet metal or merchandise, or doing house repairs, he could ask permission and pay a contribution to those jobbing in his place. You showed usefulness in your own way in the killings, or you paid. In any case, you weren't forced to kill as in the first days. As long as the main activity was progressing properly, as long as you were not protesting out loud, the authorities became more flexible. The fines varied with the gravity of the fault, and the person's purse. It was 1,000 or 2,000 francs for an ordinary offense, but it could go as high as 5,000 if you had overdone it. At first these fines were very punishing for a farmer, because of his poverty. Afterward, thanks to looting, they became more acceptable, especially if the authorities happened to forget about the fines altogether. Marie Chantal. The farmers were not rich enough, like the well-to-do city people, to buy themselves relief from the killing. Some doctors and teachers in Kigali paid their servants or their employees so as not to dirty themselves. On the hills, many killed simply to get around their poverty. If they went along on the teachings, they did not risk fines, and besides, it could pay off big on the way home. Whoever found a chance to sheet metal his roof, how could he hesitate? Ignis. If a neighbor noticed you had sneaked off, he might come to see you that evening and ask for a small sum, under the threat of denouncing you to the judge the next day and making you pay a heavier official fine. If you showed a willing spirit, you profited by reaching agreement with him. That is why in our group we arranged among ourselves to cover up our lapses on the sly. John Baptiste. At first the killing was obligatory. Afterward we got used to it. We became naturally cruel. We no longer needed encouragement or fines to kill, or even orders or advice. Discipline was relaxed because it wasn't necessary anymore. I don't know anyone who was struck because he refused to kill. I know of one case of punishment by death, a special case, a woman. Some young people cut her to punish her husband, who had refused to kill. But she was in fact Tutsi. Afterward the husband took part without whining. In fact, he was one of the busiest in the marshes. If one morning you felt worn out, you would offer to contribute with drink, and then you went along the next day. You could also replace killing with other useful tasks, like preparing meals or for visiting the Interahamwe, or rounding up cows scattered in the bush so that they could be eaten. And when your bravery returned, you would take up the tool again and return to the swamps. Fulgence. Aside from the fines of money or drink, I know of no case of punishment, like a cudgel or a machete blow, for refusing to obey. Ill treatment might threaten simply if you refused to pay the fine, but that never happened, thanks to the cash from looting. If the rich person hears the news of his find with more peace of mind, that is certainly something I have learned. Ignis. One evening they condemned a Hutu woman to death and cut her in public to demonstrate a bad example. She had insolently demanded the cows of her Tutsi husband, who had just been slaughtered. Aside from that, no one in Kibungo was cut for punishment, or even hit. Pancras. People said that some were mistreated for slipping away, but I do not personally know of any such case on our hill. I believe these people were mistreated because of squabbles over looting. There are even wicked colleagues who accuse their neighbors simply to get their hands on a coveted share, a plot of land, for example. Ellie. In the evening, we had to report to the leader about exactly what we had killed. Many boasted, for fear of being taunted or frowned on. That was also a good reason why we did not bury the bodies. Someone suspected of faking could guide the verifiers to the truth. But you weren't beaten if you behaved weakly during the day. The requirements were not that excessive. You just found yourself poorly rewarded, and that was unfortunate. Leopold. Mornings I checked the absences. Someone might show up drooping because of too much drink, and that passed because it was a common reason. Also, someone might offer a pressing obligation, like an illness or a piece of business. Anyway, if the reason wasn't too bad, the person had to pay a fine or a jerry can of uragua. It could even go as high as a case of primus. Some people were beaten, but only if they had lied shamelessly. Payo. Anyone who had the idea of not killing for a day could get out of it, no problem. But anyone with the idea of not killing at all could not let on, or he himself would be killed while others watched. Voicing disagreement out loud was fatal on the spot, so we don't know if people had that idea. Of course you could pretend, dawdle, make excuses, pay, but above all you could not object in words. It would be fatal if you refused outright, even hush-hush with your neighbor. Your position and your fortune could not save you from death if you showed a kindness to a Tutsi before unfamiliar eyes. For us, kind words for Tutsis were more fatal than evil deeds.